Everyone who starts a garden has the same daydream. You put a seed in the ground, add a little water, and suddenly you have an endless, sprawling buffet right outside your back door. But biology rarely works that way. Take a standard crop like cabbage. You water, weed, and watch that plant for up to 80 days. And at the end of nearly 3 months of work, you get exactly 1 head of cabbage. Once you pick it, the plant is done. If you have an acre of land, that 1-to-1 ratio is fine. But if you are working with a small urban raised bed or a few patio containers, dedicating a huge chunk of your footprint to a single harvest vegetable is a terrible return on your physical space. To get more food out of less space, you need crops that don't quit after one harvest. You need continuous yield systems. We're talking about indeterminate vining plants that fruit all summer, and cut-and-come-again greens that regrow their leaves after every harvest. When square footage is your primary bottleneck, you have to abandon traditional farming logic. Maximizing a small garden means shifting entirely to plants designed to give you multiple harvests from a single root system. But an endless harvest has a catch. A plant that produces continuously requires the gardener to work continuously. Because these plants are constantly generating new physical mass, whether that's heavy tomatoes or thick kale leaves, they act as aggressive extractors. They rapidly pull massive amounts of nutrients and water straight out of your soil. This matrix compares standard single-harvest crops against continuous yield systems. We are looking at 4 specific metrics: the harvest event, space efficiency, soil drain, and required maintenance. The single-harvest crops are easy on the soil and low maintenance, but terrible for space. The continuous systems win on space efficiency, but look at the bottom 2 rows. Soil drain and maintenance are exceptionally high. Those high costs come down to a basic biological imperative. A plant's only goal is to reproduce. If you let a fruit or a leaf reach full maturity and stay on the stem, the plant assumes its reproductive job is done. It stops growing and shuts down. That physiological trigger puts the burden on you. To keep the plant in a state of continuous production, you have to relentlessly monitor the beds and harvest the crops before they reach that final maturity stage. Successfully building a high-yield garden requires accurately matching a plant's specific maintenance tax to the actual time and energy you have available to spend. To figure out which continuous producers belong in your soil, we need to treat the garden like an investment portfolio. This is a quadrant chart measuring garden return on investment. The horizontal axis measures the daily maintenance effort required, and the vertical axis measures the physical impact or caloric yield of the crop. We are going to map 7 proven continuous producing vegetables onto this framework. The top left quadrant is the optimal zone, high yield for relatively low physical effort. The bottom right is the trap, highly demanding plants that offer very little culinary reward for your hard work. Navigating this matrix is the only mathematical way to engineer a garden that produces heavy volume without it turning into a second full-time job. We'll start with the leaf regenerators. This group includes cut-and-come-again greens like looseleaf lettuce, Swiss chard, and kale. On our chart, these 3 drop squarely into the moderate effort, moderate yield section. You get a steady supply of fresh salad greens, but you have to check on them a few times a week. You earn that steady supply through a very specific harvesting mechanism. You only pluck the large, mature leaves on the outside of the plant, meticulously leaving the tiny leaves in the central growth node intact. Executing this specific cut tricks the plant. Because the core remains active but the mature solar panels are gone, the root system is forced to continuously push out new foliage from the center. Both Swiss chard and kale have thick, durable cellular structures that give them natural heat and cold tolerance. They can sustain this growth cycle even as the summer temperatures peak. Lettuce, however, is highly vulnerable to a biological threat called bolting. When the summer sun hits a certain intensity, the plant panics and shoots up a tall flower stalk to go to seed. The moment that happens, the leaves turn incredibly bitter and inedible. To keep the endless harvest going for your lettuce, you have to introduce a physical structural intervention, like installing a shade cloth to cool the soil and block the harsh afternoon rays. Leaf regenerators offer unmatched space efficiency. But you pay for that efficiency through delicate, precise harvesting techniques and strict climate management. Next, we move to the garden's massive caloric producers, the indeterminate heavyweights. The classic examples here are vining tomatoes and zucchini. Looking back at our quadrant chart, tomatoes and zucchini immediately drop into the high-effort, high-yield territory. The sheer volume you get from these plants is staggering. A single indeterminate tomato plant, properly supported, can yield between 12 to 20 pounds of fruit over a single growing season. But that heavy fruit requires a massive vertical footprint. If you don't aggressively prune the suckers and tie the main stems to a sturdy trellis, the unsupported vines will collapse under their own weight and quickly succumb to soil-borne diseases. For zucchini, the heavy maintenance comes at harvest time. You have to check the plant daily and cut the fruit while it's still under 6 inches long. This constant removal forces the plant to create more flowers to try and reproduce again. If you miss a 48-hour harvest window, that tiny squash balloons into a massive overgrown marrow. The plant senses its genetics are secure inside those large seeds, and it completely shuts down new flower production. There is also an invisible subterranean cost. Growing 20 pounds of fruit takes fuel. These heavy feeders will rapidly strip your soil of essential phosphorus and calcium over the span of just a few months. To prevent catastrophic failures like blossom end rot, where the bottom of your tomatoes turn into black, sunken craters, proactive soil testing and mid-season fertilizer top dressing are absolutely mandatory. Indeterminate heavyweights provide massive caloric bulk and enough excess for winter preservation, but they demand the strict discipline of daily structural, harvesting, and nutrient management. The final crop grouping focuses on speed. These are the rapid multipliers, specifically scallions or Welsh onions, and continuous pole beans. On our chart, these two land exactly where they should: scallions in the low-effort, low-yield quadrant, and pole beans in the moderate-effort, high-yield zone. Scallions have a brilliant regeneration trick. If you snip the green shoots 1 to 2 inches above the soil line, the white bulb stays intact underground and pushes out new green shoots in mere days. They require almost zero maintenance, but the trade-off is highly limited culinary versatility. They are a garnish, not a full-calorie meal. Pole beans offer more substance. By planting vertical pole beans instead of ground-level bush beans, you ensure the plant will continuously produce new flowers from spring until fall, provided you keep picking the pods. But cole beans share the exact same vulnerability as zucchini. If you leave a few pods on the vine long enough for the beans inside to swell and mature, it instantly shuts down the entire production cycle. While rapid multipliers offer fast, reliable growth, strict harvesting rules still apply to keep their life cycles spinning. Understanding how these plants operate biologically is only half the equation. Now you have to build a strategic garden plan based entirely on your personal lifestyle constraints. This decision tree flowchart maps out 3 main grower profiles: the time-poor optimizer, the space-restricted urbanite, and the caloric homesteader. It all starts with one question: what is your primary constraint, time or space? If we follow the time-poor path, the tree leads directly to scallions, Swiss chard, and kale. These plants forgive you if you skip a day of watering, making them the ideal low-maintenance crops. If we follow the space-poor path, the strategy shifts. You have to grow up. Vertical climbers like pole beans and indeterminate tomatoes are required to maximize a tiny footprint. And if your goal is the bulk and preservation path, the tree lands squarely on zucchini and indeterminate tomatoes for maximum caloric output. Building a successful continuous harvest requires perfectly aligning your biological crop selection with your most restrictive lifestyle constraint. Selecting high-yield vines guarantees you will have enough volume to feed a family through the summer and pack away jars of sauce for the winter. But committing to those heavy vines means committing to daily pest checks, aggressive watering schedules, and constant structural maintenance. But planting these heavyweight crops is a critical error if you plan to travel frequently during the summer. If you leave a tomato plant unattended for a week in July, you will come back to a collapsed, diseased mess. Now contrast that with the cut-and-come-again greens. They offer a much lower total caloric output, but they provide perfectly reliable, low-stress yields for a busy balcony gardener. An endless harvest is never truly free. The plants will do the growing, but you must pay for it with your labor. Figure out the price you are willing to pay and choose your crops accordingly.